What fundraisers need to know about sports and philanthropy. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm joined today by Connie Falcone. She's the founder and CEO of Firefly Athlete, and she is combining her love of sports with her knowledge in philanthropy. And Connie, thanks so much for being with us here on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Thank you, Bill. I'm delighted to be here.
All right. I'm a former sportscaster with a lot of interest in sports. How about you? What's your background in the world of sports?
Well, my claim to fame is that I'm Connie from the Cubs. I spent 7 seasons with the Chicago Cubs leading Cubs Charities. And as I like to say, I don't have a background playing sports. I was a mathlete, not an athlete.
But you were there in 2016, as I recall.
I was there. And yes, I do have the ring, which I am not wearing on this morning's podcast. My apologies.
Yeah, I always love when you meet folks from professional teams and they go, oh, yeah, I worked for, such and so, and they do the bling with the ring. And of course, Indiana University has a connection to that World Series title.
How about it?
Yeah, with Kyle Schwarber. So, Connie, help us understand what led you to create Firefly Athlete. What is this organization all about?
Sure. Well, the primary goal of Firefly Athlete is to reduce the barriers to participation for athletes in philanthropy. One of the things that I recognized when I was working with the Chicago Cubs is that there are many athletes that have a purpose in their heart and they don't have the ability to activate. So if you think you're a young player coming up on a sports team and maybe you grew up with food insecurity and it would be important to you to give back. It's very, very hard to find the time and to find the right people to help you make that happen. And so when I was with the Cubs, that's what we did. We worked with athletes, anybody that wanted to do something related to a passion, we helped them to amplify. And one of the things we recognized when I left the Cubs is that doesn't really exist in the world. It's you could go to your team, you could go to your agent, you could go to your family, and then you get tired of trying to make it happen. So we're sort of this one-stop shop that helps athletes, bridge the gap and do whatever it is they wish to do to create their legacy off the field.
Hey, Connie, that would be for the rest of us who are not elite athletes. Maybe a little bit difficult to understand that a pro athlete with all of the fame and the wealth and the recognition has difficulty accessing anything, right? These folks are at the top of the world culturally. How do they encounter barriers for philanthropy?
Well, okay, so your listeners are going to understand this. The knee-jerk reaction for a lot of athletes is, well, I need to start a nonprofit organization to do what I want to do. And we know that is a huge task, right? You are forming an organization. And so I think part of the issue with athletes is they just don't understand what's involved in doing nonprofit work. So that's thing number one. It's just education. But even with all of the resources at their disposal, you can't buy a good nonprofit, right? So a lot of them will work with the team's nonprofit, which is great, and I encourage that. Sometimes agents will try to help identify nonprofits, but that's not their primary goal. Their primary goal is to generate revenue for their organization. So they frequently turn to family members. And if you can imagine having no experience in the nonprofit space and trying to do this for your professional athlete, and if you do it wrong, you're on the front page of the paper, there's a lot of missteps that could take place.
How hard is it, right? I just set up a lemonade stand outside of Wrigley Field and raise a little bit of money. That's a nonprofit. No, it's a legal entity and all the steps that need to be taken. You also mentioned time and people. Again, help us understand the time barrier because I'm thinking, for example, a pro athlete plays, let's say in the NBA, and they have 2 or 3 games a week. And even if they have practices, that means they have 3 to 5 days during the week. When they're really not working all that much outside of practice. Help us understand that time barrier that athletes face.
Yeah, I do think it's hard for those of us that are not elite athletes to understand what takes place to stay elite. And I've often talked. In fact, I had a call with a player in the NFL, and he's like, I spend my day trying to figure out how not to get cut from the team. So on the days that you're not practicing, traveling, working with your trainer, working on your skills, there's not a whole lot of time left. Some of the leagues do provide for, community days, which is nice. And typically you would be doing something with your team that day, going out to a community center or what have you. But more often than not, athletes start to realize that if they really want to do something philanthropic, that it's going to involve time they just don't have. Don't forget, too, many of them have families. So there are trailing spouses saying, hey, you have 2 hours today. Here are the kids.
You were on that 1 week or 2 week road trip. Welcome home. There's the lawn. Here are the kids, right? All the things. And so I also have to ask you about people. And you mentioned they turn to well-meaning, well-loving family members, but maybe don't have the knowledge and sophistication to lead a nonprofit organization. You mentioned the agents. And as you said, first of all, agent has lots of clients and they're out negotiating the best deal for those clients. But also, we read in the media the horror stories of these folks who are crooks who are trying to take advantage of these athletes, right? And hey, I'll help you with your money. And of course, the Shohei Ohtani story is probably the one most spectacular in the last couple of years. So I would have to think too that even in that regard, these athletes already have their guard up, and now here's somebody coming along and say, hey, I'll help you with your charitable giving. So finding the right people, Connie, I'm thinking that's part of the challenge that these athletes are facing.
100%, Bill, 100%. And remember, trust is a huge issue. So one of the things we find candidly in our own business development work is we ask ourselves, how can we expedite the speed of trust? Because, the clubhouse too, guys are talking, gals are talking, hey, I got burned trying to do this thing. So there's a real culture of mistrust. So that's why oftentimes they turn to family members. And you're right, well-meaning, but as we all know, you don't file your 990 and things go south, or you file it wrong and things go south. That's just one small example.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Connie, help us see from the athlete's perspective. And I know you can't generalize necessarily because, the player who's the reserve isn't maybe getting as much attention as the player who's the superstar. And yet all of these athletes are receiving calls and letters and attention all of the time. How would you describe how these athletes hear from nonprofit organizations? Is it like a constant tidal wave? Is it occasionally something in between? How could you describe for our audience, just what these athletes face from very wonderful nonprofit organizations are making the world a better place, but boy, they hope to get that star player, either as a spokesperson, a donor, coming to the event and so forth.
Yes, I understand that. I having been on the nonprofit side of the coin myself, I understand that mindset that, gosh, if we could just get Kyle Schwarber, who I have to name drop, is a client of mine.
Yes.
Go Indiana. Go Hoosiers. Hoo. So the nonprofit organization is looking for ways to amplify their message. And so I get it. But I think what nonprofits have to realize is, one, to your point exactly, these athletes are getting it from all sides. And two, what I fully believe in is that there has to be an authentic connection. Just asking Kyle Schwarber to say something about your nonprofit is not going to do your nonprofit any good unless, for example, you support first responders, which is the mission that's near and dear to his heart. So they're also filtering a lot of these requests through teams, through agents, et cetera. So it's very, very hard for a nonprofit to access an athlete. I get approached a lot about, could we hire you to find an athlete ambassador for our nonprofit organization? So I'd love to talk just a bit about that, because I think that's actually an interesting in, and the expectation of the nonprofit should be, to begin with, you're going to have to pay for that. So let's go back to, a food insecurity example. It would be possible to find an athlete that has an authentic connection to food insecurity, maybe somebody that faced that growing up. But the way to get the athlete in the door is to take some of your development dollars and ask the athlete to maybe show up, pay a fee, show up at our fundraiser. Maybe you create a couple social media posts, and that allows there to be an initial introduction to the athlete and potentially forge a relationship that could last for a few years. And I always like to say, pay them first. They're going to see what you do. They're going to fall in love with your mission. Maybe you pay them year 2, but hopefully by year 3 or 4, they're paying you. They're making donations because they see the value of your work.
Connie, what you're describing is so similar to long-term relationship building, which is what we teach at the fundraising school, with a little bit difference that nonprofit may need to be the first organization making the payment, hoping for donations later on down the line. And I just want to associate with 2 quick stories. When I've been involved with sports and philanthropy, first, we led a mentoring initiative for youth here in the state of Indiana. And we tried to find contrasting people who would agree that youth mentoring is a good thing. And we had the Indiana University men's basketball coach at that time and the Purdue University men's basketball coach at that time. And it's like these big rivals, they can't stand each other, but they both agree on youth mentoring. How did I get to those coaches? Not directly. Right. I knew senior leaders at both universities who then took to the next level, 6 degrees of separation. The next thing I know, I'm in front of both coaches recording those messages. And also a nonprofit I led had a wonderful relationship with Peyton Manning. The first time I met Peyton, we needed to pay his speaking fee, to your point. And then we were able to maintain a relationship from there moving on. So again, if you're getting into sports, folks, these are just some of the rules of the road. And if you're objecting to paying the fee, then don't get into this kind of work. I mean, it's just one of those types of things we need to be aware of. And so, Connie, one thing I want to ask you about too, because now the athletes are at the high school and the college level, the high school ones moving into college and the ones in college with NIL are getting paid and paid substantially. What are you seeing in terms of philanthropy as this elite high school athlete is being told, you come play for our college, here's 6-7-figure contract. Hey, you're at this college, come transfer, here's this 6-7-figure contract. What is happening with these elite athletes as they're now coming into this wealth at an earlier age? Are they thinking philanthropically, and what do nonprofits need to know?
2 points I would love to make about that whole high school and collegiate NIL space. One, it's the Wild West. And I think, unfortunately, collectives initially were utilizing charitable appearances as a way to funnel dollars to these athletes. And it makes me so mad because what we don't want is athletes to have the expectation of getting paid for nonprofit work. That's not the best thing. The second thing I'm hearing, and candidly, we do not work with high school or collegiate athletes right now, is that people are approaching them saying, "Oh, you just got $2 million. You should start a charity." And I'm trying to get the megaphone out. No, don't do that right now because 1, as we all know, it's complicated. But 2, $2 million in the grand scheme of your life is not a lot of money, especially if you don't make it past college. So it's interesting to me how much I think harmful information is out there swirling around some of these. They're kids. Remind ourselves they're kids. So I just think the whole space is ripe for some type of, really detailed level of education for these high school and college athletes.
Well, Connie, thank you. You're providing us with so much good insider information, great advice, and wonderful guidance. And wonder if you have a final word of advice for nonprofits. One of the things that struck me in this conversation too was to learn what is the passionate cause that an athlete might have, which is no different than any time we're pursuing a donor. Are their philanthropic motivations and values aligned with the cause and mission of our nonprofit organization? And if you're all about food insecurity and the athlete has other philanthropic motivations, you don't want them to show up even for a fee if it's not coming from their heart. And so knowing where that athlete is coming from philanthropically is so important as well. So I appreciated that comment that you made earlier. Any other advice that you have for fundraisers as they're thinking about intersecting with athletes?
I think the one thing to bear in mind is that the athlete ambassador is really going to pull in for you and your organization that annual fund or everyday donor. An athlete ambassador isn't going to land you your $1 million gift. And so I think what I always like to tell folks is two things. One, yes, it's going to be the everyday donor that comes in. And two, it will hopefully amplify your mission to an audience that you have not heretofore seen. So please understand how to steward and retain those donors. That's an important piece of that.
I appreciate that. The wealthiest, our high net worth donors, might already have access to some of these athletes.
Exactly.
From the tickets that they sell or the donations they give to the university and the seats and the access and all the different types of things. But can this help us build our base of annual fund donors? That's a wonderful, wonderful comment from Connie Falcone, who is the founder and CEO of Firefly Athlete, as she is counseling athletes on their philanthropic activity and us on the fundraising side on how to proceed with wisdom. At the Fundraising School, we have 27 different courses leading to 5 different certificates. We can bring custom training to you, curriculum designed for your specific needs. We do all of this in person and online. We have our quarterly webinars, this weekly podcast, and our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising. And where to find all of this is online at go.iu.edu/TFRS. I'm grateful for our guest today, Connie Falcone, and a podcast produced by Mike Anthony and Jennifer Boffman. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.